Do you really think a cleaner can understand business? The CEO's sharp question echoed in the heavy air of the meeting room, like a cruel echo turning into a dagger in my chest. Her eyes, full of contempt, looked me up and down, while the heads of the executives around nodded in agreement. My knees weakened, but I did not let that weakness show. The contrast was stark, the opulent luxury of the office, with its gleaming glass tables and cutting-edge technology, versus my reality of stained uniforms and cheap cleaning products. It was a room that showed power, a true temple of exclusion where every detail screamed the disparity between those in control and those who were invisible. I, Ana Oliveira, a cleaner in a world that refused to listen to me, was about to challenge not just the CEO, but an entire system that marginalized people like me. As I moved through the room, cleaning the spills from a poorly served coffee, my mind raced. Memories of difficult days and silent struggles filled my thoughts. Like my mother, who worked as a cleaner and taught me that dignity is not linked to a job title, but to character. Anger bubbled inside me, contained but fierce. They didn't know I wasn't just a cleaner, I was a student of human behavior. With an above-average IQ and a natural ability to read people, I knew that true intentions often hid behind smiles and high positions. Still, I am just a cleaner, I murmured to myself, as I cleaned an unwanted stain from the floor. The vice president, a man who always wore an arrogantly condescending smile, looked at me with disdain. "Look at her," he mumbled, as if anyone cares about a cleaner's opinion. Those words echoed in my mind. How could anyone be so blind to the truth that lies in the voices they ignore? Silence was my best weapon. I knew that what was about to happen could change everything. My instinct told me that the vice president was not just an executive, he was a snake in disguise, ready to strike. I was sure he was plotting something. That's when I made my decision. I would refuse to be just a spectator in a game where I could be the main player. As I cleaned, I listened to side conversations, eavesdropping for information and gathering details. In that room, the air was heavy with a smell of power and pretense, but I wouldn't let it get to me. I knew there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface of rehearsed smiles and well-polished words. Every laugh that echoed among them was like a push, a silent provocation, and I was more than willing to enter the battle. When the CEO looked at me again, her expression showed arrogance, but I was no longer willing to keep silent. "May I share something?" I asked, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. The room went quiet. Looks of disbelief surrounded me. I've noticed the vice president has been acting strangely, I continued, my courage growing. I believe he is not being sincere. Laughter echoed again, but this time, I didn't back down. There, surrounded by leaders who ignored me, I realized that my dignity would not be destroyed by their contempt. I wasn't just a cleaner, I was Ana Oliveira, and my voice was finally beginning to rise. The fight was just beginning, and I knew I had a powerful advantage, the truth. The silence that followed my statement was deafening. The executives' gazes, once full of contempt, were now fixed on me as if I had become an exotic curiosity. I had crossed an invisible line, and the tension in the air pulsed, almost palpable. The CEO, visibly annoyed, turned to me, but before she could respond, the vice president interrupted. "A cleaner talking about sincerity? That's laughable," he shot back, his arrogant tone filled with contempt. The cynical laughter of his colleagues echoed again, as if I were a character in a ridiculous play. What they didn't understand was that, at that moment, I was more determined than ever to turn that power game around. My hands trembled, but not from fear. No, it was adrenaline pulsing through my veins. I knew I needed to act fast. As I continued to clean, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Instead of letting humiliation paralyze me, I would use my ability to observe and analyze to gather information that could expose the vice president and his true interests. In the days that followed, I adopted a vigilant attitude. During my hours in the office, I took advantage of every interaction, every casual conversation among the executives. People often forgot I was there, immersed in my routine, and this became an advantage for me. As I cleaned, I listened to fragments of discussions, whispered exchanges, all fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. The vice president behaved more and more strangely, making subtle comments about business plans that made no sense and could actually harm the company. One afternoon, while tidying the cafeteria, I overheard a conversation that chilled me. "Of course, I can manipulate this to look like a board decision," the vice president said, his voice low but firm. "A small diversion of resources, and we can secure our future. No one will notice." My heart raced. This was exactly what I needed to build a strong case. I decided that the best approach would be to collect recordings of the conversations. I didn't have access to sophisticated equipment, but with my smartphone, I could record discreetly. The next week was a dance between vigilance and cunning. At the end of each day, I returned home with audio files that could change everything. The justice I sought was beginning to materialize, but the vice president was not an easy opponent. He realized I was starting to interfere, and quickly began to use his influence to intimidate me. "Hey, cleaner," he called out as I walked down the hallway. "Are you sure you want to keep getting involved where you don't belong?" His voice was threatening, and I felt a chill down my spine. He looked me in the eyes, and the message was clear: I was a target. "If you feel uncomfortable, I can call security to escort you. I don't want you to have problems because of your opinions." The threat was implicit, and security seemed more an extension of his power than a protection. But I wouldn't let fear paralyze me. With each passing day, my determination only grew. There was something deeply satisfying in being observant, in watching how he played his cards. He thought I was a disposable piece, but I was a strategic player. As I continued to collect evidence, I realized that my journey was not just about getting revenge on the vice president or gaining recognition. It was also about giving a voice to all the people who, like me, were invisible, silenced by a system that refused to listen to them. I dreamed of a place where dignity and equality were the norm, not the exception. Finally, after days of collecting and analyzing, I managed to put together a convincing dossier. The recordings I gathered had the power to expose not only the vice president's treacherous intentions, but also the neglect of a corporate structure that ignored its most vulnerable voices. When I looked at the content, adrenaline shot up my spine. This was more than an opportunity for change, it was a chance to restore dignity not only for myself, but for all who had been underestimated because of their positions. As I prepared for the decisive meeting, all my insecurities began to resurface. What would happen if they disregarded the recordings? What if the CEO decided I was just a cleaner once again? Doubt consumed me, but I couldn't let it get me down. I remembered my mother's words: "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it." I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was doing all this. The day of the meeting arrived, and I knew I was about to risk everything. With my USB drive in my pocket and courage burning in my chest, I entered the meeting room. What was at stake was much bigger than myself. I was about to confront not just the vice president, but an entire system that tried to silence me. And, regardless of the outcome, I was ready to fight for the truth. The day of the decisive meeting finally arrived. The atmosphere in the meeting room was filled with tension, like a wire about to snap. Executives in sharp suits adjusted in their chairs, each immersed in their ambitions. The air was thick with the aroma of strong coffee, and I knew that if there was ever a moment to change the course of my life, this was it. My hands were sweaty as I held the USB drive in my pants pocket. What I carried there was more than a device, it was proof that I wasn't just a voiceless cleaner, but someone who had the power to transform an entire narrative. The vice president was present, his arrogant smile even more evident, and the CEO seemed nervous, alternating glances between him and the meeting agenda. "I appreciate everyone's presence," the CEO began. "Today, we will discuss the future of our partnership with investors." With each word, my heart raced. I knew this was my moment. What I was about to do could lead to a complete reversal in the balance of power within the company. As the CEO delved into numbers and charts, my mind was in a whirlwind. Now or never, I whispered to myself. Adrenaline pulsed through me. I remembered my mother's words: "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it." "May I make an observation?" The phrase left my lips as a whisper, but the room stopped. All eyes turned to me. Silence took over, and I felt the pressure of every second. "Anna, you're here to clean, not to speak," said the vice president, his tone filled with disdain. The muffled laughter from the executives echoed, but I ignored it. What was at stake was bigger than me. "If you'll allow me," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I've discovered some information that could affect the company's future." The CEO frowned, intrigued. The vice president cast a furtive glance. "I recorded some conversations that indicate a betrayal of the board's trust. And I'd like to share this with everyone here." The murmur in the room grew, and an expression of disbelief spread across the executives' faces. The vice president was visibly irritated. "This is absurd. You can't just accuse someone without proof." He tried to intimidate me, but now he was the one surrounded by the shadows of doubt. "I can prove it," I declared, taking the USB drive from my pocket. With a determined gesture, I walked to the presentation table and connected it to the laptop. The click sounded like a gunshot on a battlefield. As the screen lit up, the atmosphere became tense like a bow about to be released. The recordings began to play, and the voices of the vice president and his accomplices echoed through the room. "Of course, I can manipulate this to make it look like a board decision," he said, his insensitive laughter echoing in the background. The faces of the executives, who had previously found my presence amusing, were now pale. The truth was being revealed. The CEO remained silent, her eyes widening as the recordings progressed. The vice president tried to interrupt, but his words failed. What was being revealed was undeniable. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was almost deafening. "This is not possible," he shouted, trying to regain his control. The room was now in turmoil, and murmurs of disapproval echoed. "Anna, you can't accuse me like this. This is slander." I was ready for this reaction. "No, this is not slander. This is a revelation of who you really are. The truth doesn't hide behind a position, but is revealed in the courage of those who know how to see." The impact of my words was profound. The vice president, who until then felt invulnerable, was now exposed, and his arrogance crumbled. The executives began to distance themselves from him, their masks of respectability falling. The CEO finally spoke, her voice now full of seriousness. "Anna, you not only brought a betrayal to light, but you also made us reflect on our culture. We need change, and that change starts now." What began as a fight for dignity was transforming into a fight for justice, and I was ready to lead this new era. The room was in an uproar. Executives murmured among themselves as the weight of the truth settled like a heavy cloud. The vice president, in his attempt to defend himself, seemed increasingly isolated. "This is not what it looks like," he insisted, but his voice failed, and the credibility he had left quickly dissipated. "Anna, you've done something incredible by alerting us to this," the CEO finally said, her expression now reflecting a mix of respect and regret. "We need to investigate these allegations immediately. We cannot let this go unnoticed." As the meeting unfolded, I realized that my struggle was not just a personal battle, but a movement that could create a wave of change. The way the CEO now addressed me and the other executives was different. Voices that were once ignored were now being heard. Finally, the CEO called an extraordinary board meeting, where all board members and investors would be present. The agenda? To discuss the vice president's betrayal and the future of the company. I would be invited to give a presentation, perhaps a role I never imagined I would fill, that of spokesperson for change. In the following days, the atmosphere in the company began to transform. Conversations about diversity and inclusion were part of discussions, and the need for a more respectful and equitable work environment was high. I was called to meetings, not just to clean, but to contribute ideas. I believe it was at that moment that I realized my life had changed irrevocably. When the day of the board meeting arrived, I was nervous but determined. I prepared a presentation that not only addressed the vice president's betrayal but also promoted a new vision for the company. With slides showing data on the impact of diversity in business, I knew I had the chance not only to expose the corruption but also to shape the future that I and so many others deserved. As I spoke, the gazes that were once disdainful were now full of interest and respect. Investing in diversity is not just an ethical issue, it's a matter of survival for companies in the 21st century, I argued. The room was attentive, and I felt the power of my words spreading, like a fire beginning to spread. At one point, the vice president, who was in the room, raised his hand. "That's not true. You can't just change the culture with an empty speech," he declared, in a desperate attempt to regain control. But now, the room responded with murmurs of disapproval. No one was willing to listen to his threats anymore. He was alone, and the situation couldn't be clearer. Power had changed hands. When I finished, there was a deep silence before the CEO spoke up. "Anna, your words were powerful. We need to ensure that our company's culture reflects what you advocate for. We cannot allow what happened to be repeated." From that moment on, the decision was unanimous: the vice president would be fired, and a new policy of inclusion and diversity would be implemented immediately. But what happened next was even more surprising. After the meeting, the CEO approached me and said, "We need you in a more significant role. I am offering you a position as a diversity and inclusion consultant. I want your voice to always be present in the company's decisions." I was speechless. The promotion I had never imagined was now a reality. But that wasn't all. My heart raced when she added, "And, in addition, I would like you to lead a mentorship program for young Black professionals. Your story is inspiring and can help many others find their way." I accepted the offer with gratitude, but I knew the real fight was just beginning. I wanted more than a position, I wanted a legacy. The changes I dreamed of needed to impact people who, like me, were seen as invisible. In the following months, I worked tirelessly to create the mentorship program. The launch was a moving event, where young Black professionals could connect with industry leaders. In my speech, I shared not only my journey but also the story of my mother, who had taught me to fight and never give up on my dreams. Looking at the audience full of young, hopeful faces, I realized that the fight that had started as a cry for personal justice was now transforming into something much bigger. "I grew up in a working-class home, and my mother was a cleaner," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "She always told me that dignity and struggle go hand in hand. Today, I am not just here to speak for myself, but for all who have been silenced and underestimated." By the end, tears streamed down the faces of many in the audience, and I knew I had created a space where voices were valued. The double plot twist of my life was not just about the personal victory against the vice president, but about the transformation of a system that needed to be challenged. The social impact of my victory echoed beyond the company's walls, and I was determined to ensure it would endure. That night, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that true victory was not just about having a position of power, but about the ability to inspire significant changes. That struggle, which had begun in the meeting room with laughter and contempt, was now a collective fight for dignity and justice. And so, my journey was not just a story of triumph, but a call to action. I knew that every voice mattered, and that, together, these voices could change the world. And you? Have you ever had the courage to stand up and use your voice in a moment of injustice? Share your story, and let's multiply these voices. Together, we can be the change we want to see in the world. The fight for justice is not just mine, but belongs to all of us. Every story, every shared experience, is a fundamental piece in building a more inclusive and respectful future. Let's make a difference together. The success of the mentorship program exceeded all my expectations. With each new class of young professionals that graduated, I felt a warmth in my heart. What had started as an idea to help others now became a real, vibrant, and pulsing movement that spread both within and beyond the company walls. The energy the new generations brought was contagious, and I realized I was witnessing a silent revolution. Lidisha, the young woman who once expressed her doubts, emerged as one of the program's most proactive leaders. Her growth was a testament to the impact that the safe and welcoming space we created had on those who were often left on the sidelines. In one of our meetings, she stood up and shared her own experience of how she had become more confident in her voice and abilities. I never thought I would have the courage to speak up in a meeting. But now, when I look to the future, I see a place where I can be myself and, perhaps, inspire others, said Lidisha, her eyes shining with emotion. I applauded, but what touched my heart was seeing the other participants coming together to support her, celebrating all our victories. The results of the program were so impactful that the CEO called me to a meeting about how we could expand our reach. Anna, the mentorship program is a success, and the feedback is excellent. We need to take this to a broader level, she said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. What if we implemented a training program for potential leaders, focused on diversity and inclusion? The idea made me excited, but also hesitant. I knew this new challenge wouldn't be easy. The changes were significant, and facing resistance would always be part of the process. However, the determination I saw in the young people inspired me. I thought about my own journey and how each obstacle shaped me. I knew we had the opportunity to transform the company's culture in an impactful way. Soon, we structured the training program. We gathered a diverse team to ensure all voices were heard. Working with this group was invigorating. During the discussions, I realized that resistance came not only from outside, but also from within. Some people in leadership positions were reluctant to open up to this new vision. Once, a director expressed his concern, "Why should we change, if the company has already been successful this way? What's wrong with what we've done so far?" That made me reflect. It was true that the company was successful, but the real question was, successful for whom? With my voice, I decided to confront the resistance. With all due respect, we need to evaluate what success means for all our employees, not just for some, I replied. If we don't change, we risk losing valuable talent who seek a welcoming environment. Diversity is a necessity for the survival of any business. The mood in the room began to shift. Some people were reflecting on what I had said, and the discussion deepened. This was the beginning of a new dialogue. The CEO intervened and reinforced the importance of our proposals, supporting the need for change. The board decided that the vice president would be fired, and the new diversity and inclusion policy would be implemented. In time, our leadership training program was launched. The reception was incredible, and participants reported significant changes in their mindsets and practices. What was once a meeting room dominated by a single perspective now became a space where diversity of thought was celebrated. One of the committee members raised an idea that sparked a new proposal. Anna, have you thought about how we could take this message beyond our company? We could share our experience and serve as an example. That idea of creating an annual conference on diversity and inclusion where leaders from different sectors could gather began to take shape. Soon, we began planning the event. What started as a dream transformed into a real project, and our company's first diversity and inclusion conference was scheduled for the next year. The work involved a lot of planning, but the excitement was palpable. On the day of the conference, the auditorium was full. Leaders from various industries were ready to share their experiences. I began my speech with a simple but powerful thought: each of us, regardless of our position, has the power to influence change. Don't underestimate your voice. Looking at that diverse audience, I realized that the journey that began as an act of resistance had transformed into an inspiring movement. I concluded the speech with a call to action. Let's work together to ensure that no voice is ignored. The fight for inclusion is not the responsibility of a few, but of all of us. Each of you can be an agent of change. At the end of the conference, the reception was incredible. People were excited, sharing ideas, and committing to bring about change in their own organizations. I realized that the fight for justice and inclusion exceeded the limits of what I could imagine. What began as a personal quest for dignity was now a flame spreading throughout the industry. As I walked home that night, I looked at the stars and smiled. The journey had not been easy, but every challenge, every battle, and every victory was part of something much bigger. The legacy I dreamed of creating was coming true, and I knew that the fight for justice and inclusion would continue. And you? How can you become an agent of change in your community? Share your experiences and inspire others to act. Together, we can create a world where all voices are heard and valued. The fight for inclusion belongs to all of us, and every step counts. Let's act. With the success of the conference, a new phase began to unfold in my life and at the company. The excitement that permeated the environment was palpable. The transformation was more than visible, it was felt. I knew we were just at the beginning of a journey that could impact not only our company, but also the communities around us. The mentorship program was expanding. With the support of leadership, we began to include not only young professionals, but also students from local schools. I organized visits to these schools, where I talked with students about careers, opportunities, and the importance of never giving up on their dreams. The spark in the eyes of those young people was like fuel that propelled me to keep fighting. One afternoon, I was at a high school, sharing my story. Looking at the audience of teenagers, I saw many faces that reflected doubts and insecurities. But, at the same time, there was a flame of hope. A girl raised her hand and asked, "Anna, what should you do if the people around you don't believe in you?" It was a question that echoed my own journey. I took a deep breath and replied, "Believe in yourself, even when no one else does. The most powerful voice you can have is your own. Surround yourself with people who support and uplift you. You are not alone in this fight." Seeing confidence grow in her expression, I realized that those words could be the beginning of something transformative. In the following months, interactions with the students became an essential part of my work. I organized workshops where they could explore their passions and skills, and where we could discuss the importance of diversity in all sectors. The response was incredible. Young people who once felt invisible began to open up, share their aspirations, and connect with each other. With each new class that graduated, I saw not only the individual impact, but the collective one. There was a sense of community emerging, and it was exciting. The idea that a group could unite around a common purpose was more powerful than I had imagined. But not everything was easy. As the program grew, I received resistance from some team members who still didn't see value in the diversity initiatives. In a board meeting, an executive raised his voice, questioning the need to continue investing in programs that, according to him, diluted the company's focus. Feeling the tension in the room, I took the floor. Diversity is not a distraction, it's a strategy. Companies that embrace diversity have greater innovation, better financial results, and, most importantly, are more representative of the real world. To ignore this is to ignore the future. The room was silent, and that moment became a turning point. Some colleagues began to nod in agreement, recognizing that the change we were seeking was, in fact, vital for long-term success. As the year approached its end, the impact of our work became visible. The mentorship program had grown, promoting a culture of inclusion that was now being adopted by other companies in the region. What started as an individual effort began to spread like a movement. I organized a celebration for everyone who participated in the program, bringing the community, the mentors, and the students into a single space. The event was an explosion of emotions. Stories of achievements, challenges overcome, and bonds formed were shared. I felt a deep sense of gratitude and accomplishment. At the close of the event, I went on stage and looked at the audience. Today, we are here not just to celebrate our achievements, but to commit to the future. Each of you has the ability to be an agent of change. Let's continue to fight for inclusion and justice, not only here, but everywhere we are a part of. Applause echoed through the room, and I knew that those words were the promise of a new beginning. All of us were part of a legacy under construction. Voices that were once silenced were now being celebrated. And so, my journey was not just about personal transformation, but about a collective movement that was just beginning. The fight did not end there, it was an ongoing commitment. As I walked home that night, I felt that every step we took together was a step towards a more just and inclusive future. And you? How can you become an agent of change in your community? Share your experiences and inspire others to act. Together, we can create a world where all voices are heard and valued. The fight for inclusion belongs to all of us, and every step counts. Let's act.